بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كتاب صفات المنافقين وأحكامهم. The book of the description of the Munafiqeen and rules pertaining to them. The first narration in this one and only chapter of this book, Zayd ibn Arqam narrates, "We set out on a journey along with the Prophet, in which we faced much hardship. And Abdullah ibn Ubay said, لا تنفقوا على من عند رسول الله حتى ينفضوا من حولك. Do not spend on the companions of the Prophet so that they may disperse from him through the hardship." And as Zuhair says that this is one recitation of the ayah in Surah Al-Munafiqun. And he also said, لَإِن رَجَعْنَا إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ لَيُخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَذَلُّ. When we return to Al-Madinah, the honored man, referring to himself, will drive out the one who is mean or base or lowly, referring to the Prophet. Zayd says that he heard this and he reported it to the Prophet. And the Prophet sent for Abdullah ibn Ubay to ask him, did he say this? And he took his strongest oath that he did not say it and that Zayd is lying. Zayd says that I was perturbed because he was being accused of being a liar, until Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed the ayah, إِذَا جَاءَكَ الْمُنَافِقُونَ, the first ayah of Surah Al-Munafiqun. So then after that, the Prophet called these people, Abdullah ibn Ubay and his folk, to seek forgiveness for them. But they turned their heads, as if they were hooks of wood fixed onto the wall, and they were the most handsome of men. The term al-munafiqun comes from the word an-nafiqa, which is a tunnel which the jerboa digs, so that it can escape from the other end of the tunnel when it is trapped from the first end. Such are the munafiqun. They find a way out when they are trapped, because they are two-faced. And the worst of people with Allah Jalla wa Ala is the two-faced, the one who comes to one group of people with one face and the other group of people with a different face. So he comes to the Muslims with the face of a Muslim, and he comes to the kuffar with the face of a kafir. And these munafiqun were known to the people unofficially. Nobody pronounced that I am a munafiq. Nobody ever said that, but it was unofficially known who the munafiqun were. And they were known by the tone of their speech, the type of things they said, and the way they said it. You can always tell a true Muslim speech and a kafir speech. You can tell by the words used, by the style of speech, and so on. وَلَوْ نَشَاءُ لَأَرَيْنَاكَهُمْ فَلَعَرَفْتَهُمْ بِسِيمَاهُمْ وَلَتَعْرِفَنَّهُمْ فِي لَحْنِ الْقَوْلِ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ أَعْمَالَكُمْ. If we wanted, we could have shown them to you, so you would have known them by their facial features. However, you will surely recognize them through their crookedness of speech, and Allah knows your works. So their speech is crooked, such as in the example you've heard here, and such as in many other examples, like a munafiq saying in one of the battles, "We have not seen a people more greedy and more cowardly than the Prophet and his companions." They're accusing the Prophet and the companions of a description that is most fitting to them. Being greedy and being cowardly when you meet the enemy, this is what the munafiq is all about. It is not what the Muslim is about. The Muslim is not greedy. He eats lightly in one intestine, where the kafir eats in 7 intestines. And the mu'min does not turn his back when confronted with the enemy. The munafiq does. And there are many other examples, some more severe, some less severe, but the point is, they have a crookedness in their speech, where you can tell that this speech is not coming from a heart which is full of iman. Rather, it is coming from a blackened, hardened heart. The Prophet could not kill these people, even though they are the most dangerous ones, because even if killing them is a benefit, no doubt about that, because these people will sow discord amongst the Muslims and they will destroy the Muslims from within, and it's harder to guard against them. So there is a benefit in doing away with them. However, the harm that will be accrued would be yet greater. لا يتحدث الناس أن محمدا يقتل أصحابه. Let not the people start saying to each other that Muhammad kills his own companions. And this narration generally is pertaining to Surah Al-Munafiqun. We may also take that conveying an evil speech or something which is wrong to the authority is not namima, if it will result in a greater benefit, just as Zayd ibn Arqam did as he conveyed the words of Ibn Ubay to the Prophet. The next narration from Jabir, he says that the Prophet brought Abdullah ibn Ubay out from his grave after he was buried, put him on his knees, made nafath on him, this is to say, blow on him, emitting a little bit of spit, and he shrouded Abdullah ibn Ubay with his own shirt, and Allah knows best. Also from Ibn Umar, he says that when Abdullah ibn Ubay died, his son, also named Abdullah, came to the Prophet and asked him to give his shirt so that Abdullah ibn Ubay could be shrouded. The Prophet gave him that, and then he asked that the Prophet should pray his funeral prayer. The Prophet got up to observe the prayer, but Umar radiallahu anh took hold of the clothing of the Prophet, and he said, "Are you going to conduct the prayer for him, whereas Allah has forbidden you to pray for him?" And the Prophet said, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, "Istaghfir lahum aw la tastaghfir lahum, in tastaghfir lahum 70 marratan falan yaghfir Allahu lahum." Seek forgiveness or do not seek forgiveness. Even if you seek forgiveness 70 times, Allah will not forgive them. The Prophet said, "I will seek forgiveness more than 70 times." But Umar said, "Innahu munafiq." He is a munafiq. So anyway, the Prophet did pray the janazah over him, and after that Allah Jalla wa Ala sent down the ayah in Surah Tawbah, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ. Do not pray for any of them who dies, and do not stand at his grave. Okay, so both of these narrations have this idea of the Prophet giving his shirt as a kafan or a shroud for Abdullah ibn Ubay. And this man was at the head of the Munafiqun. Now it has been said through a famous story that Abdullah ibn Ubay gave his shirt and shrouded Hamza radiallahu anh when he fell at the Battle of Uhud. However, it needs to be ascertained whether that narration is authentic or not, because the shaheed are buried in their clothes without being shrouded. But if it so happened to be the case that Abdullah ibn Ubay gave his shirt to shroud Hamza, then it's as if the Prophet is repaying Abdullah ibn Ubay this favor. If not, then it is as if the Prophet is shrouding Abdullah ibn Ubay in his shirt so that the followers of Abdullah ibn Ubay, their hearts can be softened to Islam. However, his son, also by the name of Abdullah, was a real Muslim, not a munafiq, and a good companion of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet acceded to his request to shroud his father and to seek forgiveness and pray for him as well, the Salat al-Janazah. It appears the greatest reason for this is to soften the hearts of the followers of Abdullah ibn Ubay. As he was a leader, he had a large following. The question for us is, when did he shroud Abdullah ibn Ubay? Because in one narration of Jabir, he says that the Prophet took Abdullah out of the grave and then shrouded him. But in the other narration of Ibn Umar, where Ibn Ubay's son Abdullah comes and asks the Prophet, it says that the Prophet gave him the shirt. One way of reconciling this, and Allah knows best, is to say that the Prophet gave him his word that he will give him the shirt, but he only actually physically put it on him after he was buried. And that's the time he also made nafath on him as well. And to seek blessing from the Prophet's saliva is of course permissible, but it is not permissible to seek blessing from the effects of anyone other than the Prophet. We also find from this narration that Umar ibn al-Khattab yet again spoke that which Allah agreed with. You do not pray over the munafiq. Other examples where Umar was correct and the Prophet made the wrong decision was taking the fidya from the prisoners of Badr. Umar was also correct about advising the Prophet to make his wives wear the hijab, and he was also correct about taking the maqam of Ibrahim as a place of prayer, and Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed ayat agreeing with what Umar said or suggested. Now the interesting point about this narration is that the Prophet wanted to seek forgiveness more than 70 times. So the question is, do the numbers have a mafhum, an antithesis? Because if they do, then seeking forgiveness 71 or more times would work. But if they do not have an antithesis, and that these numbers are just for exaggeration purposes, then of course whether you seek forgiveness 70 times or 1,000,000 times, it would not work. And herein lies the difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Those who say that the numbers do have an antithesis say, look, here the Prophet understood it that way, that the numbers do have an antithesis, so that you can seek forgiveness 71 times.
and then only afterwards he found out that actually the number 70 was for exaggeration and was not intended in and of itself. They say, had the second ayah not come down, meaning prohibiting istighfar for the munafiqeen in the absolute sense, then the Prophet's interpretation would be valid, in that the numbers do have an antithesis.
Also in the chapter, from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he narrates, there gathered near the Kaaba 3 people, 2 were from the Quraysh and 1 was a Thaqafi, or he said 2 from Thaqafi and 1 from Quraysh. In any case, there were 3. They lacked any understanding in the deen, but they wore much flesh, that is to say, they were fat. One of them said, does Allah hear us when we speak? The other one said, He hears us when we speak loudly, but not when we speak in undertones. But the third one said, if He hears us when we speak loudly, then He can certainly hear us when we speak quietly. And Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed the ayah, وَمَا كُنْتُمْ تَسْتَتِرُونَ أَن يَشْهَدَ عَلَيْكُمْ سَمْعُكُمْ وَلَا أَبْصَارُكُمْ وَلَا جُلُودُكُمْ. And you did not conceal yourselves lest your ears, your eyes, and your skins would stand witness against you. So, what about this question then? Does Allah hear us when we speak? Only a person who has no knowledge would ask such a question about Allah Jalla wa Ala. These people were fat and had little knowledge. This is the exact description of the Munafiqun. And hence we find this ignorant question coming from ignorant people. Does Allah hear us when we speak? One of them made the analogy that if Allah can hear us when we speak loudly, then He can hear us when we speak quietly, because if Allah is so far away from us, independent of this world, and He can still hear us when we speak loudly, then what difference will it make if we speak quietly, seeing as though He's so far anyway, and yet still He can hear us? These people were overweight and they had little knowledge. Are these two qualities linked? Well, not necessarily, but they can be, as overeating kills the heart. And if you kill off your heart, then it will not accept knowledge. And one of the benefits of fasting is that you're not eating and drinking, so you have more time for dhikr and learning. And when you have a full belly, it can often lead to heedlessness or ghafla. We find here that the ears, eyes and skin will testify against people. وَقَالُوا لِجُلُودِهِمْ لِمَ شَهِدْتُمْ عَلَيْنَا قَالُوا أَنْطَقَنَا اللَّهُ الَّذِي أَنْطَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ خَلَقَكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. They will say to their skins, why do you testify against us? They will say, Allah made us speak, the one who makes everything speak. And He created you the first time round, and to Him you are returning. Also in the chapter from Zayd ibn Thabit, he says the Prophet set out for the Battle of Uhud. Some men who were with the Prophet came back, and to this the Prophet's companions disputed with each other. Some said we should kill them, others said no, we should not. And Allah revealed the ayah, فَمَا لَكُمْ فِي الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِئَتَيْنِ. Why is it that you are divided into 2 groups about the Munafiqeen? So these Munafiqun were traitors to the Muslims, outwardly appearing to be Muslims, secretly aiding the kuffar, by not fighting with the Muslims, leaving them in the lurch, or by proactively aiding the kuffar. They held a deep-seated grudge against the Prophet and the Muslims. So some of the Sahaba said that they deserve execution because of their treachery, and others said no, because they're proclaiming Islam, then they should be left alone as Muslims. Also from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he says that the men from the Munafiqeen, during the time of the Prophet, they were such that when the Prophet would set out for a battle, they would remain behind, and they would rejoice in staying behind. And when the Prophet returned, they would offer excuses to him, and they would take oaths, and they would love to be praised for that which they have not done. Allah Jalla wa Ala revealed the ayah, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ يَفْرَحُونَ بِمَا أَتَوْا وَيُحِبُّونَ أَن يُحْمَدُوا بِمَا لَمْ يَفْعَلُوا فَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّهُمْ بِمَفَازَةٍ مِّنَ الْعَذَابِ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Do not consider those people who rejoice in what they have done, and they love that they should be praised for that which they have not done. So consider not them to be safe from the punishment, and they shall have a painful torment. So they would rejoice in staying behind from a battle, much like how a lazy schoolboy rejoices when he gets an opportunity to miss school. That's their first fault. And their second fault is they love to be praised for that which they have not done. So we find here again, time after time, Allah Jalla wa Ala exposes the traits of the hypocrites without mentioning any particular names. And this is a good technique, because if you mention names, then you're bringing the criticism down to a personal level, and you want to try to avoid that as far as is possible. And rather you want to speak about traits of certain people and their habits and practices and actions, rather than mentioning individual names, because that can lead to much fitna, which is not needed. So you can enjoin the good and forbid the evil without creating a personalized fitna. Also in the chapter, Marwan said to Rafi', go to Ibn Abbas and ask him if every one of us will be punished for being happy for doing his deed and likes being praised for what he has not done. Then in that case, we will all be punished. So he went to Ibn Abbas, and Ibn Abbas said, what do you have to do with this ayah? It was revealed concerning the Ahlul Kitab. And then Ibn Abbas recited, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ لَتُبَيِّنُنَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَهُ. And then he recited, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ يَفْرَحُونَ بِمَا أَتَوْا وَيُحِبُّونَ أَن يُحْمَدُوا بِمَا لَمْ يَفْعَلُوا. The same ayah as in the last narration. Ibn Abbas said that the Prophet asked the people of the book about a particular matter, and they concealed this matter, and they gave him an answer other than what was written in their scriptures. Then these people went out and they informed others that they answered the Prophet about that which he asked them. So they answered the Prophet's question, whereas in fact they did not. They gave him some false information, and they sought praise for this, and they were happy about what they had done, meaning given Prophet the false information, but actually they had concealed the knowledge. So we find from this narration and the previous one that for the same ayah in Surah Al-Imran, right towards the end, لا تحسبن الذين يفرحون بما أتوا ويحبون أن يحمدوا بما لم يفعلوا فلا تحسبنهم بمفازة من العذاب ولهم عذاب أليم. We have two reasons why this ayah came down. The first one is that it came down in regard to the Munafiqun staying behind and not marching out with the Prophet and being joyous at that and wanting to be praised for what they have not done. And the second reason is that it came down in regard to the Ahlul Kitab concealing the knowledge and desiring praise for what they had not done. That is to say, they did not answer the question, yet they wanted praise for answering the question of the Prophet. Certainly the context of this ayah would support what Ibn Abbas said, because the context of the ayah, meaning the ayah just before it, speaks about the Ahlul Kitab concealing the knowledge. But there is no problem in saying that the ayah is revealed for both camps, the Ahlul Kitab and the Munafiqun. Also in the chapter, Qais ibn Ubad al-Tabi'i, he says, we said to Ammar radiallahu anh, inform us about your fighting alongside Ali radiallahu anh in the Battle of Siffin. Was it your choice, or did the Prophet order you to do it, or advised you? And Ammar said that the Prophet did not give me any specific advice, specific to me, which he did not give anyone else. And he further went on to say that the Prophet said, في أمتي 12 منافقا لا يدخلون الجنة ولا يجدون ريحها حتى يلج الجمل في سم الخياط 8 منهم تكفيكهم الدبيلة سراج من النار يظهر في أكتافهم حتى ينجم من صدورهم. In my ummah there are 12 munafiqun who will not enter Jannah, nor will they find its fragrance until the camel goes through the eye of a needle. For 8 of them, the ad-dubayla would be sufficient. It is a flame of fire which will appear on their shoulders, and it would enter them until it will come out of their chest. So from this narration we find the humiliating and harrowing punishment that will be meted out to the munafiqeen. Also, Jabir reports that the Prophet said, whoever climbs this hill, the hill of Murar, his sins would be forgiven, just as the sins of Banu Israel. So the first to take their horses up were the Banu Khazraj, and there was a ceaseless flow of people going up the hill. And the Prophet said to them, all of you have been pardoned except the owner of the red camel. He says, we came to him and said, "You also come with us, so that the Prophet may seek forgiveness for you." But he said, "By Allah, that I should find my lost property is more beloved to me than your companion seeking forgiveness for me." And he was a man who was looking for a lost item of his. So this episode also agrees with the ayah, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا يَسْتَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ لَوَّوْا رُؤُوسَهُمْ وَرَأَيْتَهُمْ يَصُدُّونَ وَهُمْ مُسْتَكْبِرُونَ. When it is said to them, "Come, let the Messenger of Allah seek forgiveness for you," they turn their heads and you see them turning their backs out of pride. And that ayah exactly describes this man. He does not want forgiveness, he does not want the salvation in the hereafter, rather, he is more concerned about his lost item. Also, Anas reports that there was a man from the tribe of Banu Najjar who would recite Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran. He used to be a scribe of the Prophet, but then he ran away as a rebel and joined the Ahlul Kitab. They gave this incident much importance. They boasted that the man who used to be a scribe for the Prophet has now embraced our deen, and they were much pleased with him. After some time this man died, and the people dug a grave for him and buried him, but the earth threw him out, and so they buried him again, and the earth threw him out again, and the same thing happened again. So in the end they just left him behind, unburied. The scariest thought from this narration is that if the scribe of the Prophet can become an apostate, he was the companion of the Prophet, he was a scribe of the Prophet, reciting Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, writing down the Quran as it came. Somebody with that type of status, so close to the Prophet, such an eminent status, if he can turn apostate, then how about the case for us? Which is why we have to seek firmness from Allah Jalla wa Ala. Also from the narration we find the humiliation of the munafiq in this life, but the humiliation of the hereafter is yet worse. Also in the chapter, Jabir reports, "We were coming back from the journey to Al-Madinah, and there was a violent gale that even almost buried the rider. To which the Prophet said, بُعِثَتْ هَذِهِ الرِّيحُ لِمَوْتِ مُنَافِقٍ. This wind has been sent for the death of a munafiq. He says, when we entered Medina, a great munafiq had died. So we find from this narration that the Prophet is given news of the unseen, as the Prophet could never have known that this wind has been sent to destroy a munafiq. Also in the chapter, Iyas reports from his father, who says, we visited an ill man from fever. When I placed my hand on him, I said, by Allah, till this day I have never seen a temperature quite as high as that. The Prophet turned his face to the companions and said, may I not inform you of a severer temperature than that which these two men, pointing to two men, would have on Yawm al-Qiyamah? And the two men he was indicating to were hypocrites, riding upon the camel, turning their back towards the Muslims. Again, this narration shows us the Munafiqun were well known through their statements and through their actions and through their general behavior and style of speech. Not because they declared themselves to be Munafiqun, no one would do that. And we also find that the Prophet is informed of the news of the unseen. However, we cannot declare anyone to be from the people of Jahannam, even if his nifaq is well known, as we are not allowed to speak about the matter of the unseen without text. This is from the etiquettes we have towards Allah Jalla wa Ala. And also from Ibn Umar that the Prophet said, مَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ كَمَثَلِ الشَّاةِ الْعَائِرَةِ بَيْنَ الْغَنَمَيْنِ تَعِيرُ إِلَى هَذِهِ مَرَّةً وَإِلَى هَذِهِ مَرَّةً. The parable of the munafiq is like a sheep wandering between two flocks of sheep. It goes to one flock at one time and the other flock at another time. And this is exactly as the Quran says, مُذَبْذَبِينَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ لَا إِلَى هَؤُلَاءِ وَلَا إِلَى هَؤُلَاءِ. They are swinging like a pendulum between two sets of people. They do not belong to them and they do not belong to the other group either. It is also worth knowing that the Munafiqun during the day of the Prophet ﷺ were better than the hypocrite types we find in this day and age, because at least the Munafiqun during the time of the Prophet had the decency to try to hide their nifaq. Even though it did show up, like we say, it has to show up, but at least they did try to hide it. They had that level of decency. Whereas we find the heretics of this day and age, many a time, they openly declare their heresy, and they are proud of it. So they would openly declare things like homosexuality is natural and it is permissible, or that, for example, the hijab is not obligatory, or that riba is permissible, and many other affairs about which there is a consensus. They would oppose it and are proud to oppose it, as if they are not doing anything wrong. Their hearts are far more corrupt than the hearts of the Munafiqeen during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So if the Prophet talks about the ad-dubayla for some of the Munafiqeen, which is, like we said, the flame which appears on the shoulders and comes out through the chest, and this idea of the earth not accepting the dead Munafiq, and that the Quran mentioning, for example, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لَهُمْ نَصِيرًا, that the Munafiqun will be in the lowest depths of the fire. If all of these types of warning apply to the Munafiqun during the time of the Prophet, then what is your opinion about the heretics who openly declare their heresy as if it's something permissible in this day and age? What would be your opinion about them? They are the Zanadiqa. The Zanadiqa would be people who openly declare their heresy, whereas the Munafiq is the one who keeps his heresy a secret, or at least tries to anyway. We also find in Sahih al-Bukhari the statement of Hudhayfa, the one whom the Prophet told the names of the Munafiqeen. He says himself that the Munafiqun of today, he's speaking in his time, after the time of the Prophet, are worse than that of the time of the Prophet. Because during the time of the Prophet, he says, they would keep their nifaq a secret, whereas today, and he's speaking in his day and age, but after the death of the Prophet, he says today they openly declare it. And in a narration, he says nifaq was only during the time of the Prophet. As for today, it is only kufr ba'da iman. There is only kufr after your iman. So he says there is no nifaq. Also, a final note, 2 narrations have passed us by where the Prophet speaks about an individual person or people, what they would not like to be said. The first narration about the mountain passway of Murar, where he says everyone is forgiven except the owner of the red camel, and the other narration about the man suffering a very high temperature, and he says that the temperature of Jahannam, which these 2 men will face, is yet worse. And he was speaking about individual people. So is this backbiting? The answer is no, because they were kuffar, and it is allowed to backbite the kuffar, who do not have a peace treaty with you, because backbiting is when you speak about your brother, that which he does not like. But as for a kafir who has enmity towards you, then backbiting him is permissible, especially if such people are deceiving the Muslims by pretending to be Muslims, yet inwardly they are kuffar. So the deceptive type of people, whose deception is intentional and nefarious, these types of people, there is no problem with exposing their affair. Warning though, this is not pertaining to those people from the Muslims who may say something wrong and fall into a mistake, yet they mean well, because everyone can make mistakes. Even the greatest of scholars have made formidable mistakes, such as saying that Jahannam will cease to exist, and other such matters.
But we do not say that they have a nefarious agenda. So for people like these, we simply correct their mistakes and refrain from character assassinations. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. The word munafiq, meaning a hypocrite, was first used in the Quran. Where does this word come from? Question number 2. Is it possible to recognize hypocrites or heretics even though we do not know what is inside a person's heart? If it is possible, how so? Question number 3. Why would the Prophet honor the leader of the Munafiqeen, Abdullah ibn Ubay? Why not just execute him? Give 2 reasons